And what are the characteristics of Clark Kent? He's weak. He's unsure of himself. He's a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and every once in a while I like to have a couple of my good friends on here just to discuss a character and maybe a couple of stories that really maybe develop that character, maybe to define them. And here today, we're going to talk about Superman and specifically Clark Kent. And to talk with me about this is my good friend Eric Breen and Dylan from The Real Comic Book Gamer. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Glad you could make it. Dylan, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me back.
I'm glad to have two of my good friends that love Superman, can definitely talk about Superman all day long, but specifically we're going to talk about two stories, John Byrne's Man of Steel and Up and Away, Superman Up and Away by Jeff Johns and Gary Busiek. So with John Byrne, Man of Steel, this was right after he left Marvel Comics. I guess he was kind of driven away by Jim Shooter. The two didn't see eye to eye. He moved over to DC Comics, and he got the flagship character right off the bat, and he got to create Man of Steel, the miniseries, which I believe is the first comic ever that had a variant cover. So there's two covers for number one, and really redefined a lot of the lore with Superman, but really where it made the biggest impact was with Clark Kent. Eric, I know you've said that in previous videos where we've talked that Man of Steel really created a Clark Kent that everyone could relate to and really made him somebody that you could see Lois Lane actually falling for.
I've said for years that Man of Steel is the best miniseries I've ever read. And what made it so special was John Byrne's pitch to revitalize Superman concentrated on Clark Kent and not Superman. He was the first writer to come up with Superman is just someone that Clark Kent plays when he's not being Clark Kent. And the miniseries did a great job of really fleshing that out. It started with, him growing up in Smallville, because in this iteration, he'd never been Superboy, and how his powers developed over time. And when he finally went off to Metropolis and tried to do some good, everybody, as he put it, wanted a piece of him. So he had to come up with a way to keep the two Clark Kent identity and the person he wanted to be when he's helping people separate. So his mom makes him a costume, and that's how Superman, came to be. And the rest of the miniseries fleshes that out with, how the second issue tells how he, got settled into Metropolis and how Lois Lane thought she was getting the scoop. And then she goes to the planet, and it turns out that Clark has already beaten her to the punch and gotten the story. And then it goes on from there with, his relationship with Batman and how that was going to be different post-crisis than before. And then the next one goes into Lex Luthor and how, Lex Luthor sets up something to make people think that Superman's working for him. And when he turns him down, and we find out that he set up the incident on the yacht that, allowed Superman to demonstrate his powers, he'd set the whole thing up. So the mayor deputized Superman, had him arrest Lex. And then Lex says, basically, no one is bigger than me, and you're dead. It's just a question of when. And from there, they introduced the Bizarro character, who was Lex trying to create his own Superman. And he does something that allows Lucy Lane to get her sight back. And then the sixth issue, he learns of his Kryptonian heritage, but realizes that he is truly a man of Earth, and that's who he is going to be going forward.
John Byrne really laid all the groundwork for the Superman that we know today, the Clark Kent that we know today. And like I said before that, Clark Kent was always kind of portrayed as this kind of bumbling idiot. You could never really see, or you could only see how Lois Lane would fall in love with Superman, but never really Clark Kent. Dylan, just thinking about all the work that John Byrne put into making Clark Kent more of a relatable character, kind of an everyday guy when he was Clark Kent, how effective was that? And how much of a change was it from the way he was portrayed prior to that?
It was a huge change. You're right. He was just a bumbling idiot prior to that. It was all just about trying to get people not to see Clark and Superman as the same thing. So he's the complete opposite of Superman in most ways prior to this, where he's just a bumbling idiot that was incapable of doing anything. To where in John Byrne's run, which he was, well, sort of how and Perry describes him up and away, brilliant but erratic. That's how he was after John Byrne run, where he was a great reporter, just not too reliable. He'd get sick or something, have to make excuses for Superman. But he was suddenly a person, because even not just someone that you couldn't see Lois getting to, but he was someone that you couldn't really see getting hired or working somewhere, because he was just so unreliable prior to this, there to where Byrne sort of made him an actual person, an actual character, someone that seemed a bit more realistic. And it was nice to see that. And I loved his version of Clark, and also the explanations that he gave for seeing what the sort of depth that Clark put into keeping up the Clark persona, like the weights he has in his apartment to keep it up. You're like, okay, Clark Kent's ripped. I have to give an explanation for why he's ripped. And then he puts those weights there, even though there's the wrong weight. And Lois is like, wait a second, at least you see stuff like that. Like he put thought into it, which is cool. Because before it was kind of like glasses and a hat and that was it. Where in this, you see like they hold, when he's talking to his parents in Smallville, he does the whole slicked his hair back, put on the glasses, slouches. Then he has like all these different things set in place to build the Clark persona to separate him a bit from Superman. And yeah, it was just a great way of doing it. And this was the blueprint from now on. From now on, most people, you'll have some bad writers that still don't know how to write Clark Kent and still ruin him. But for the most part, any good writer uses this as the blueprint for this is how Clark Kent is going forward. And yeah, it was revolutionary for the character. And I really enjoyed what Byrne did with Kent.
Yeah, and he really changed his personality, where he had like a Midwestern charm, where he was kind of funny, and when Lois Lane tried to bust his balls, he kind of had a comeback every now and then, and so he was just a fully fleshed out human character as well as a superhero, and that really takes us into Up and Away. My personal favorite Superman story, and it's kind of strange because Superman's not really in the story, but it really explains who Clark Kent is. I remember watching Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2, where Bill has his explanation of why Clark Kent is the way he is compared to Superman. It's because he thinks humans are beneath him, and he has to dumb himself down, to feel like he can fit in, which is a really cynical take on the character. And obviously, Jeff Johns and Gary Busiek agree more in line with what John Byrne says, is to where he does that so there's an explanation of why Clark Kent isn't there, because he's not all that reliable and he doesn't really run into the face of danger. But when we get to Up and Away, he no longer has his powers, and he hasn't had his powers for a year. Clark Kent has been living with Lois Lane, man and wife, with no Superman. He has no superpowers. He has no reason to hold himself back as Clark Kent. So now he's the number one reporter at the Daily Planet. He's the one that's scooping all the stories. He's putting himself out there in harm's way, getting all the biggest scoops, trying to bring down like all the criminal underworld in Metropolis, putting himself on the line, because that is who Clark Kent is. That is not just who Superman is. He is a hero, within himself. And I think that the way that Busiek and Jeff Johns do that in Up and Away is just fascinating. Perfectly executed. What was your take on that story when it comes to their portrayal of Clark Kent in Up and Away, Eric?
There were some writers at DC that were kind of like systematically undoing everything that Byrne had done, in particular Mark Waid. But this story, since it was set in the post-Infinite Crisis, in the 1 year after, we got to see what Clark Kent could be like without the powers. And I thought the story was very interesting that while this was going on, Lex Luthor, who had always claimed that he could do anything if Superman wasn't in the way, spent the year he was away devising ways to destroy someone who wasn't there anymore. As far as Clark, I said, it was like Superman's values juxtaposed onto Clark Kent. And it really made for a very interesting story, especially the way he slowly got his powers back. Then he worries about, if I get my powers back, I mean, I've had this year as a husband, with my wife, and all that's going to change dramatically now that I have my powers back. And how is Lois going to react to that? And I thought the way she did was, very well done when she just says, I have 3 words for you. Go get them.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that moment because there are 2 enormous moments in my mind. The one is the very opening scene where he's basically in harm's way. He ends up, in the subways of Metropolis. He's in harm's way, and finally, Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, Hawkgirl arrive at the scene. They end up backing him up, and they take down the bad guys, and they end up on a rooftop with Clark Kent. And Hal Jordan says, listen, you don't have your powers anymore, but you're still a hero. We have a ring waiting for you. And he offers him a spot in the Green Lantern Corps. Dylan, what did you think about that moment? Because I was blown away.
I was too, and it was great. And they do a great job when he finally gets the ring and he goes up in the sky, and you see that. So he's wearing his Smallville like Letterman jacket and then his Clark Kent clothes and everything. And he goes up there, and the big green version of himself is still wearing glasses with the Smallville jacket on. And they touch on that later to where that shows that he sees himself as Clark Kent. He sees himself as a human. He doesn't see himself as a Superman, as this, bombastic guy. He sees himself as Clark Kent. That moment was great between Lois and Clark, to where Clark tells her that, and Lois is like, yeah, I know. I noticed that, but I didn't say anything because I wanted this to be your choice. I didn't want to pressure you into it and be like, no, I want you all to myself. That moment was great. I like it too because it's exactly something that Hal Jordan would do as well, trying to get Clark back in the fight. He is definitely someone worthy of a ring that has great will. So I like seeing that. And again, that whole moment where he gets the ring and he flies up and then he's just still Clark Kent. It's so great and one of the best moments in the book. And one of my other favorite moments was catching the bullet in front of Jimmy Olsen when he goes all across the park. That was one of the other huge moments for me in this book, where he's on the other side of the park. He hears the shot goes off. He doesn't know if he has the speed to get there. He was just talking about how he needs something to push him to get back to where his powers were. Because at this point, he's sort of like a step above Captain America in terms of powers. So he's like, I need something to get me there. And then someone shoots at Jimmy. He gets there. He's like, that'll do it. And the way Pete Woods draws that panel too is perfect. The way he catches that bullet. I just love it. It's so great. So many great moments in this book. And like you, I agree. This is my favorite Superman story.
Yeah, it's so underrated. Like I said, Superman's almost not even really in it. Yeah. But another thing that's really great about this book is the relationship between Clark and Lois. Lois right now she has been treated so badly by Brian Michael Bendis and the rest of the writers on the Superman team. She basically comes off as a kind of an uncaring, like, hard ass. But in this story, she is a very loving wife, partner to Clark Kent. They're competing at the newspaper together as to be the top reporter, but they still love each other. She's very supportive. He's very supportive of her. And, according to both of them, their marriage has never been stronger during this year where he has not been Superman. And finally, we see the powers coming back. Clark's always been putting himself out there, but now his powers are coming back. Lex is coming back, into the scene. We get some cool villains. I especially like the toy man. He's my favorite villain of the whole thing. I thought he was maniacally fun. But then we get to the moment that you talked about earlier, Eric, where he finally has his powers back. It's time to have the conversation whether or not he's going to become Superman again, and they never have to have it. Lois goes to the closet, brings out the uniform, hands it to him, and basically says, you're no longer, just mine. I have to share you with the world because you're a superhero. Go kick some ass, and I'll be here waiting for you. That might be my favorite moment. It's hard to choose between that one and the moment where he gets the ring for me.
Yeah, and I just like the way that sets up the whole next battle with Lex. And when Superman has his powers, Lex has his super suit, and they both end up. Something happens that basically knocks out both of their powers, and that leaves them fighting it out, Lord of the Flies style on the beach or wherever that was. And I just thought that was great because which proved that even without his powers, Clark Kent is the better man than Lex Luthor, because I said he was able to defeat him. I said he can defeat him as Superman, he can defeat him as Clark Kent, and for all of Lex's money, power, and everything, he will never be the man that Clark Kent, aka Superman, is.
And it says so much about the three characters we've talked about the most here, is up and away. Clark Kent is a hero. He doesn't need to be Superman to be a hero. Lois Lane is a top-notch reporter, but she's also a loving wife and terrific partner, the partner for Clark Kent, his wife, and they're a great couple together. But Lex Luthor is not the man that he claims to be. He said, without Superman, I will cure cancer. I could achieve all these things if he wasn't in my way. If I didn't have to waste my time dealing with Superman, I could fix the world. And in the entire time that Superman was gone, he was just devising new ways to destroy Metropolis because he is an evil villain. There's nothing really redeeming about Lex Luthor up to this point. I know they sort of made him an anti-hero at some point, after this, but this is a great portrayal of Lex Luthor. And really, after that, there's another book. We weren't going to talk about this, but I do want to talk about this one as well. It's a recent 100-page special. It was actually written and illustrated, I believe, for Superman Confidential, but never got released until 2019. Marv Wolfman, Man and Superman. Dylan, I know you were a huge fan, but it's another excellent portrayal of Clark Kent, seeing him move to Metropolis for the first time, struggling to become a superhero, not wanting to tell his parents about all of his struggles and how he's failing. And I think it really adds to the lore of the character and an understanding of Clark Kent, who he was when he arrived at Metropolis and who he is today.
Yeah, Man Superman's a great book, and that's another book that features no Superman. It's all Clark Kent. It's all him trying to figure things out. It's when he first moves to the big city and is trying to figure out who he is. He wears a stocking on his head when he's Superman for the little bit that he is in the book, and it's just great. And it's sort of Marv Wolfman wrote part of the Man of Steel series with John Byrne. He wrote part of, not the first volume, but later on volumes he wrote in. So there's a lot of that. It reminds me a lot of the Man of Steel series, that 100-page issue, and it's great. Yeah, I got the paperback and the hardcover. It's a fantastic book, and it was the best book that came out last year. I highly recommend anyone to go check it out, but you can even use it sort of like complementary to that first volume of John Byrne's run of Man of Steel. It fits in so well. It's just such a great story, and I wish Wolfman would write more Superman. He clearly loves the character. I think it would be a great idea for DC to bring him back in to write more Superman.
Yeah, if you ever want to just have a weekend and get to love Clark Kent, read Man of Steel, then read Man and Superman, and then finish up with Up, Up, and Away, and you'll have a new appreciation, for that character. Just to finish this up, Eric, we all love Superman, but what does Clark Kent mean to you?
Clark Kent represents the best that we can be. And yes, he's got the advantage of being the most powerful man in the world, but it's his humanity that drives him, because if Clark Kent isn't a good person, Superman can't be a great hero.
Well, I don't think that you're going to be able to beat that quote there, Dylan. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap this up, or maybe give another recommendation of a comic book that really highlights what a great character Clark Kent is, and that's what really elevates Superman as a character?
I'll give two recommendations. One is Secret Origin. That really explains Lex's hate for Metropolis in this book, where he talked about they must be punished. I need my revenge on them, because Secret Origin was Jeff Johns' take on Superman's origin. It's a great book. And in that, when Clark comes to Metropolis, Lex is seen as this big, great, generous guy, because every day at noon or whatever time it is, he comes out to Metropolis and he chooses one person to make their day. He'll bring them in, he'll give them money, he'll maybe take them out to dinner, he'll do something special for them. So he's seen as basically this god of Metropolis. Thousands of people gather around the LexCorp building to see him. Then Superman shows up, and the next day there's 1,000 less people, and the next day there's 10 people there, and the next day there's no one there. Lex is suddenly taken down from this god figure and nothing in the matter of a week, because some random guy showed up and started saving people. So that book does a great job of explaining why Lex feels the way he does in Up, Up, and Away. And then there's also a Superboy book actually written by Jeff Johns called Superboy, the Boy of Steel. In that book, Superboy is doing his research on his two parents, Superman and Lex, since that's who he's cloned from. And he goes and he finds Lex's sister. Lex's sister has some degenerative disease where she's basically a vegetable, essentially. And he goes and confronts Lex about it. He's like, you say you can cure all this stuff, but your own kin, your own sister is in this state. What does that say about you? Lex goes, cures her, and then so she's able to walk, her brain's good again, she's fine, and then goes ahead and puts her straight back to the state she was in and says, once Superman's gone, I'll fix her again. He's like, until then, this is what's happened. You saw the power that I have, boy. that's exactly what I'm going to do once Superman's gone. But this is all Superman's fault. That's why my sister's like that. And it's just a great job at showing exactly how evil Lex Luthor is.
That is some evil stuff right there. I haven't read that one. I almost want to check it out just to see the car wreck. Man, Lex Luthor is the worst.
He is. Francis Manapul does the art on that too. It's beautiful.
I think we basically ran up against the time here. I love talking about Superman with you guys. You have a great admiration and knowledge of the character, way more than I do. I'm glad you could come and talk with me about Clark Kent Superman today. Eric, do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
Just to say, if you want to go a little deeper dive into Superman, there's a series of trade paperbacks called The Man of Steel that basically cover the first couple of years of Byrne, Wolfman, and Stern's run, and I recommend that highly.
Well, thanks, fellas. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man.